zero carbon. It's in effect, it's enabling a zero carbon property, but it's not actual zero carbon. And the subtle difference there, sir, is that this costing at £6,500 a dwelling won't get you to zero carbon, but my understanding is that it's to meet the 2025 future homes regulations, and we'll come on to that when we come to no doubt deal with the policy on that particular matter. But I think I'm right in saying that the council is working in that cost to the 2025 regulations, and I'd just like that as a matter of clarification, because I don't think the £6,500 a dwelling would get you to zero carbon.
Mr. Porter.
Thank you, sir. So we have applied the building regulation requirements within the scheme, and by 2025 the government's seeking about 77.5% carbon reduction, so somewhere between 20.
Forgive me, I didn't catch that. My fault entirely. Sorry.
So through implementation of building regulations, the detail's not available at the moment, but they're working towards a carbon reduction rate of somewhere between 75 and 80% by then. However, obviously in pushing for that last 30%, the council, by 2030, there'd be more work to be done. The reason we allow for that assumption on carbon reduction is we don't really know what that cost is yet. There are some figures that are bounded about getting to net zero at a cost of about £14,000 a unit, etc. in today's cost.
Sorry, when you said that cost, was that the 2025 75 to 80% carbon reduction? Is it that cost that you're not quite sure of yet?
Yes, that's right. So that's what's been estimated if you just look at the government's own work in terms of how I suppose it's a regulatory impact assessment they've done there to understand that impact. Now, what they haven't cost is to 100%. And at the moment, we only have anecdotal evidence, but the council are also doing some work themselves in understanding this cost from the consultation with various registered providers, etc. My own consultation from registered providers is that at the moment, to get zero carbon, they're looking at about sort of 14 to 16,000. But that's in an economy at this stage where there's a very strong bottleneck of supply. And also, there's not so much understanding of how you achieve that within the industry at the moment. And so if we allow for at least what cost may be in 2025 at 77.5% carbon reduction, and the council's got a requirement, which they'd like to try and meet, for zero in new homes by 2030, we would say that by that point, the 2025 figure of 77,500 starts to come down, and any other costs to get to the last 22.5% would pretty much be about the same, because there's a degree of understanding of how to implement more sustainable development. The government's also noted in their own regulatory impact assessment that the last changes in getting to zero is likely to come through to better design, for which they don't feel there would be a development impact in achieving that. And that may just be how you change the angle at which a house is built to be more south-facing, etc. And also in the embedded materials, etc. The supply chains now being available. So it becomes almost a normalised scheme, and most developers are generally looking to reduce their carbon impact as well. So with that as well, they would feel that it'd almost be a normalised approach to building as today is in terms of traditional building materials. So we don't want to over-cost that scheme, which is actually very important, because we feel actually realistically we'd be looking at some increase, but it could be lower than that. It may be a bit higher.
So is this a key sensitivity in the appraisal work that you've done?
suppose if we could do that, because if you look at the results even in the technical note, and I think we are, as most of us probably around the table here would agree, that we're seeing lower quartile build costs for big schemes. But if you look at that table A10 on, say, strategic sites, we're identifying substantial amount of headroom that would be potentially available to meet higher standards. And they do range from £500 a unit in the worst case, but potentially up to £50,000 a unit in some sites. And most of them are sort of around the £20,000 to £25,000 per unit available that could absorb any additional requirements in terms of getting to zero carbon. So, and for that reason, that policy we didn't see putting development seriously putting development at risk of non-delivery.
So I think you're saying there, Mr. Porter, then that that this is one area of uncertainty that is potentially quite an important area where there is uncertainty, but that nonetheless for the strategic sites, you're not too concerned about that, because overall any cost over and above that you've accounted for could be absorbed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Sir, if I may, I think this is a point not just for strategic sites, but for all sites. And I think my question is, can we be absolutely certain as to what we're testing here? Because I don't think these costs relate and take you back to zero carbon on all new dwellings. I think this cost at £6,500 is to get to the 2025 future home standards. And the reason why this is important is we will come on to this at a later date when we come to talk about the specific policy, is that this costing assessment is based on getting to the 2025 regulations at £6,500 a dwelling, not to zero carbon. And I appreciate the point about strategic sites and some of the headroom, don't disagree with that. But this is all sites, all dwellings, and I don't think the costing assumptions in here get you to zero carbon. And I think that point's been made by the council in their response. The zero carbon is perhaps twice that level at £14,000 a dwelling. And I wish to lay that marker down now, because no doubt we'll be coming back to this on the specific policy discussion.
Mr. Porter.
Again, just in context, when we do look at the headroom, and as you mentioned, other sites, not just the strategic sites, that we're finding they do have an average headroom of £25,000 a unit. I'm also informed that in terms of the policy, it doesn't necessarily say zero carbon, but it means that there is potential for the council to move ahead with that agenda to go into zero carbon based on the viability now.
How does the plan's policies react to or cater for any uncertainties there might be in viability terms? I mean, as you have said, Mr. Porter, this is a very high-level assessment. You didn't say this, but some might suggest that none of this in here is actually going to accurately reflect any single scheme at all ever coming forward, because different house builders and whatever do things in their own way. But in terms of any viability problems that there might be in schemes coming forward, how does the plan deal with or cater for that, if at all? does it include a viability clause?
Okay, sorry, sir. Just getting clarification that there is a note in DM1 on delivery where each site, in terms of very much the specific strategic sites, we'd look closer at delivery and phasing of delivery. And my understanding as well with regards to that specific policy, if that was the concern, is that there would be a degree of, they would to push forward to get to 2030, but they anticipate that won't happen on every site. Other sites may actually achieve it at a faster rate. So there's a degree of flexibility with that.
So I just wanted to check policy DM1. Can someone tell me what page it's on?
235.
Can I just check, is a policy DM1 a policy to which we have any main modifications that have been put forward by the council so far?
In relation to the explanatory text, we acknowledge it needs to be brought up to date with the SIL regulations and the changes therein.
Mrs. Cook.
Sorry, Sarah, it's a bit confusing. I'm Mrs. something else and Miss Cook. I should have said that right at the beginning.
Forgive me, my apologies.
It's entirely my own fault, but it's just a bit weird for me to be called Mrs. Cook.
I shall carry on doing it then.
Just on a couple of points of detail to start with. Our understanding of the work that Mr. Porter has been speaking to in relation to the carbon net zero is the same as Mr. Johnson's. In other words, the 6,500 that's in for every unit gets you to 2025, but it doesn't get you beyond. Secondly, just to go back to what Mr. Elvin said right at the outset, one of the, quite apart from all the work that is currently ongoing to inform ST15, one of the other issues here is phasing and how that affects cash flow. And this is going to be very difficult for you, Inspector Barclay, at the moment, I think, with your eyes. But you will need to look at some point at page 37 of 46, which is ST15 in this Appendix 2, you'll see that there's a column headed timing, and there is start dates and finish dates. And really, I'm just drawing that to your attention to demonstrate just how high level this is. Not for you to get too hung up about it, because we are anticipating that this is going to be superseded by more specific information when we get to the site specifics. But so just to flag that now. And also, I hope helpfully, again on a point of detail, again to agree with what Mr. Johnson has said, that we agree with the use of lower quartile costs when it comes to the strategic sites. So although we keep almost teasing you about how it's all going to come when we get to the site specifics, there is actually a measure of agreement on common points. So you can take some comfort, even though there's still a lot of work still to do in relation to transport, education, all of which is really important in terms of cash flow.
Just while we're on that, Miss Cook, yes, are things progressing apace?
I can't say a pace, sir, because when you're waiting for modelling, you've got to wait for the modelling. When it comes, then the pace comes.
I think I would say it's moving as fast as it can move. We've had several very constructive meetings, but as Ms Cook says, it's dependent on the modelling, but that should not take very much longer. So we're quietly confident about that. Can I just say, the illustration I gave you earlier in relation to phased delivery of the infrastructure for SD5 is precisely why Ms Cook makes her point about the timing of when the costs are paid. That would fit in with a phasing of the development which does not require the costs to be paid in such quantity up front. And so the timing issue is one of the key points that are being looked at in the context of the transport modelling, what each stage of the improvement in accessibility will be able to deliver on the site before you get to the major cost of the grade separator junction. So I'm saying that by way of agreement with Ms Cook and as an illustration.
Mr. Roebuck.
Thank you, sir. It was really just firstly a point of information in terms of the evidence that we've submitted. That predates the latest update, the infrastructure delivery strategy update, and the technical note that like others in the room today, I only became aware of very recently. But what I would say is that the evidence that we submitted still remains valid, having had a cursory review of that evidence so far. But I think just take the opportunity that we'd like the opportunity to respond to that separately. But the points that we made in the submission, which was drafted in February, remain valid in terms of concerns around viability. I wasn't sure whether Mr Porter, I was told, or I picked up from Mr Elvin's initial comments that Mr Porter disagreed with some of the comments that we'd made. I wasn't sure if he was going to address those or whether it was for me to raise those as part of my discussion.
Well, all I'd say is that Mr Porter's update went in with the meeting, the matter statement. I appreciate CYC 79 was only last week, but the Appendix 2 has been around for some time. And if there are points to be made about that, I'd prefer them to be made now. I mean, clearly, what you said about responding in writing to 79 is a different matter.
Yeah, that was just so I'm absolutely clear, and you can just nod because I think I'm just about to repeat what you just said, Mr. Elvin. But the Mr. Porter's technical note, the updated work that we've been talking about, that, as I understand it, was appended to the council's statement to this hearing. Yeah. That's not something that I'll be looking for any written comments on because it was frankly handed in on time. I think that might well be a good place to leave it for a break for lunch. So I now make it 12:59. Adjourn the hearing to resume at 13:45. Thank you.